The ballroom shimmered that night like a world made of gold. Soft lights hung from the ceiling, reflecting in the polished marble floor. Laughter and the gentle clinking of glasses filled the air. Elegant guests in fine dresses and black suits moved gracefully between tables, speaking in low, confident voices. A small orchestra played soft jazz near the stage, their music wrapping the room in warmth. It was a charity event, one of those nights that only seemed to exist in movies, where everyone smiled as if life had no worries. Among the people who didn't belong to that world was a young waitress named Lena. She wore a plain black uniform with a small white apron. Her hair was tied back neatly, but a few strands had escaped, brushing her cheeks as she hurried between tables carrying trays of champagne. She tried to stay invisible, as most waitstaff did during fancy events. Her eyes, calm but thoughtful, often drifted toward the grand piano near the corner of the ballroom. Lena had been working at the hotel for almost a year. She didn't talk much, but the other waiters liked her because she was kind and always ready to help. She moved quietly and quickly, never spilling a drink or breaking a glass. Yet tonight, something about the piano seemed to pull her attention again and again. Each time a note floated from the orchestra, her heart felt a small tug, like a memory trying to wake up. At one of the front tables sat a man who clearly didn't blend into the crowd, not because he was underdressed, but because he carried himself with such confidence that people naturally turned toward him. His name was Ethan. He was a well-known pianist famous for his performances that had filled concert halls across the city. The guests adored him. He had that easy smile that made everyone laugh, and the way he talked about music made him sound like he owned it. When the host announced Ethan's name, people clapped and cheered. He gave a short bow, flashing a charming grin. Even though the event wasn't about him, he knew everyone expected him to play something later in the night. Music to Ethan was more than sound, it was power, and he loved holding it. Lena passed near his table while serving drinks, and that's when he noticed her looking, for just a moment, toward the piano again. It was such a small thing, but Ethan caught it. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the quiet confidence in her expression, but it made him wonder. "You look like you want to play," he said lightly, his voice teasing but not unkind. The guests at the table chuckled. Lena froze for a second, then smiled politely, trying to brush it off. "I just like the sound of it," she said softly. A fan of music," Ethan replied, leaning back in his chair. "It's one thing to enjoy it, another thing entirely to play it." His tone was playful, but there was a hint of pride behind it. He had spent years perfecting his art, after all. To him, the piano was a craft only a few truly understood. "I think anyone who feels music can play," Lena said simply. Her words were quiet but clear, and they caught the attention of a few nearby guests. The conversation around the table softened as people listened. Ethan raised an eyebrow, amused. "Oh, you think it's that easy?" "Not easy," she said, shaking her head. "But real music isn't about how difficult the notes are. It's about what you feel when you play." Her response made a few guests smile, but others chuckled under their breath. Ethan leaned forward, clearly intrigued now. "Then maybe you should show us what you mean," he said, half challenging, half joking. Lena didn't expect that. Her heart skipped a beat. The idea of sitting in front of all these people terrified her, but a strange calmness followed. She looked at the piano again, its smooth keys gleaming under the lights. For the first time in years, she felt something stir deep inside her, something that hadn't moved in a long time. "If you want," she said quietly. The room went silent for a moment. People exchanged glances, surprised that she had agreed. Ethan laughed lightly, not mocking, just disbelieving. "After dinner, then," he said. "We'll see what the mysterious waitress can do." Lena smiled faintly and continued serving drinks, her heart thumping in her chest. The laughter and music around her felt far away. She kept thinking about what she had just agreed to. She hadn't played in years, not since her world had fallen apart. As she cleared plates from the tables, she could feel her hands trembling. Every sound, the chatter, the clinking of forks, the faint hum of the orchestra, seemed to fade behind the rush of her own thoughts. She could almost hear the piano in her mind, the keys calling her name. She remembered a small house far away from the city, a wooden piano that had belonged to her mother. She used to spend hours there as a child, learning songs by ear while her mother cooked in the kitchen and her father listened from the porch. Music had been her first language. It was how she spoke to the world. But when her parents were gone, everything changed. Lena had been only 16 when the accident happened. Overnight, her world shattered. She had to leave school to take care of her younger brother, working whatever jobs she could find. The piano sat untouched in the corner of their small apartment, until one day they had to sell it just to pay rent. From that day, she avoided even listening to live music. It hurt too much. And yet here she was, standing in a ballroom filled with sound and laughter, about to play again, because of a challenge from a man who had no idea who she really was. When she brought the last tray back to the kitchen, her friend Mia, another waitress, grabbed her arm. "What was that about? Did he really just ask you to play?" Lena nodded, managing a nervous smile. "Are you going to do it?" "I don't know," she whispered. "But I said I would." Mia looked at her in disbelief. "You haven't played in years, right?" Lena nodded again, her throat tight. I want to remember how it feels." She spent the rest of dinner trying not to think about it, but every few minutes her eyes wandered back to the stage. Ethan seemed to have forgotten the conversation, busy entertaining his guests. But others hadn't. She caught glimpses of people looking her way, whispering quietly, smiling as if waiting for a small performance after dessert. By the time the plates were cleared and coffee was being served, the tension inside Lena had built into something sharp and almost unbearable. She wiped her hands nervously on her apron and looked toward the piano again. The pianist from the orchestra had just finished a soft piece and was taking a short break. The host stepped to the microphone, thanking everyone for their donations. Then he grinned and added, "We've had a special request tonight. Our very own waitress Lena has agreed to play for us. Let's see what she's got." The words echoed through the ballroom. Lena froze. Her heart raced so fast she could barely breathe. The room erupted in light applause and laughter. Not cruel laughter, but curious, amused, the kind that people give before a small surprise. Ethan looked genuinely surprised, then smiled, gesturing toward the piano. "Go ahead," he said warmly, perhaps expecting her to decline now that all eyes were on her. But Lena didn't back out. Slowly, she walked toward the piano, her shoes clicking softly against the floor. The sound of her steps felt impossibly loud. Every guest turned their head, watching as she crossed the room. The light caught her face, and for a moment the noise faded. All she could hear was her heartbeat. When she reached the piano, she stopped and took a small breath. The keys looked exactly as she remembered, black and white, clean and waiting. Her fingers hovered above them for a moment, unsure, trembling slightly. Her reflection glimmered faintly on the shiny surface. Behind her, Ethan folded his arms, a polite smile still on his lips. The orchestra members watched quietly. No one expected much. To them, it was just a moment of entertainment before the real performance began. But inside Lena, something different stirred, an old warmth, like sunlight on forgotten ground. She remembered her mother's words from years ago. "If you ever get lost, let the music find you." She sat down on the bench, straightened her back, and placed both hands gently on the keys. The room was still. Even the waiters stopped moving. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Lena closed her eyes. Her fingers pressed the first note. The first note floated through the air like a drop of water falling into a still pond. It was soft, yet it carried across the ballroom, touching every ear and silencing every whisper. Conversation stopped, glasses were set down, and even the waiters in the back paused to listen. Something about that single note felt alive. It wasn't perfect, not polished like the performances people usually heard in that grand room. But it had something deeper. It had truth. Lena's hands trembled slightly, but once she played the second note, the shaking faded. Her fingers began to remember on their own. The melody grew slowly, blooming like a flower opening under the sun. It wasn't a song anyone in the ballroom recognized. It came from somewhere inside her, built from memories she never spoke about and feelings she thought she had buried years ago. She played with her eyes half closed, letting the sound lead her. Each note seemed to carry a memory, a morning filled with laughter, the smell of her mother's cooking, her father humming from the porch, and the quiet nights when she would practice for hours until her fingers hurt. The music was gentle at first, then suddenly strong, as if the piano itself wanted to speak. It told a story without words, and somehow everyone could feel it. Ethan stood near the edge of the stage, his smile fading as he listened. He had seen many performers in his life, students, prodigies, professionals. But something about this young woman's playing was different. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't even trying to be perfect. Every touch of her fingers sounded honest. He found himself forgetting that she was a waitress in a plain black uniform. To him, she was just a musician, pure and real. Around the room, people exchanged glances, but no one dared to speak. The laughter that had filled the air earlier was gone. Even the orchestra musicians watched her with quiet awe. They could tell immediately that she wasn't an amateur. The way her hands moved, the balance between her left and right, the emotion in her phrasing showed a deep understanding of music that couldn't be faked. Lena's heart pounded as she played, but not from fear anymore. She could feel the music running through her veins like warmth spreading through her chest. It was as if she had stepped back in time, sitting once again in her old living room beside the piano her parents had bought secondhand. She could almost hear her mother whispering encouragements and her father tapping his foot along to the rhythm. For the first time in years, the pain of losing them didn't crush her. It inspired her. It became part of the music. She didn't know how long she had been playing. Maybe 3 minutes, maybe 10. Time didn't matter. When she finally played the final note, it lingered in the air, vibrating softly before fading into silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. It was as if the whole room forgot to breathe. Then suddenly someone clapped, once then again, and the sound grew louder, until the entire ballroom erupted in applause. People stood from their chairs cheering, some with tears in their eyes. The applause wasn't polite or staged. It came from deep admiration. It was the kind of applause that only came when people were truly moved. Lena sat frozen for a moment, staring at the keys. Her hands rested lightly on them, her chest rising and falling with each deep breath. She hadn't played for anyone in so long, and now an entire room was applauding her. She didn't know whether to smile or cry. Ethan stepped forward, clapping slowly but sincerely. When the noise settled, he spoke into the microphone, his voice softer than before. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I think we've all just witnessed something special tonight." The crowd cheered again, and Lena quickly stood, bowing awkwardly. Her cheeks flushed with color. She stepped back from the piano, wanting to disappear, but the host called her forward again. "Don't run away yet," the host laughed kindly. "We need to know, where did you learn to play like that?" Lena hesitated, holding the microphone nervously. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I learned from my mother. She taught me when I was little." There was a softness in her tone, a quiet honesty that made people lean in. She didn't give a dramatic story, just that single sentence, but it carried more weight than a speech ever could. Ethan stepped beside her. "You play beautifully," he said with a respectful nod. "You reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place." Lena smiled faintly, looking down at her hands. "Thank you. I just played what I felt." For a moment there was silence again, but this time it was peaceful. People smiled, some still wiping their eyes. The mood of the entire ballroom had changed. What began as a night of fancy speeches and expensive wine had turned into something real, something human. After a while, the host moved on, thanking the guests again and calling for the final part of the program. The orchestra returned to the stage, but even as they played, the guests were still whispering about the waitress who had silenced the room with her piano. When the event ended, Lena quietly helped the other staff clean up. She tried to stay busy, hoping no one would approach her, but people did. A few guests stopped her to thank her personally, telling her how her music touched them. One woman said she hadn't cried in years until that moment. Another said it reminded her of her late husband. Lena didn't know what to say. She just smiled and nodded. Back in the corner of the ballroom, Ethan sat alone, deep in thought. When the crowd finally thinned, he walked over to her. Lena was stacking empty glasses when she noticed him approaching. She straightened quickly, unsure what to expect. "Lena," he said softly, "that was extraordinary. You have real talent." She shook her head modestly. "It's just something I used to do. I'm not a performer anymore." Ethan frowned slightly. "You could be. You should be. I've played on some of the biggest stages in the world, and I've never felt what I felt listening to you tonight." She looked at him, surprised by his sincerity. "You're being kind. I'm being honest," he replied. "There's technique, there's skill, but what you have is heart. That can't be taught." His words stayed with her even after he left. She didn't know what to do with them. That night, after cleaning the last table and taking off her apron, she walked out of the hotel into the cool air. The city was quiet, the streets empty except for a few late cars passing by. She stood under a streetlight, staring up at the sky. For years, she had buried her dream of music under work, responsibilities, and the fear of failure. She had convinced herself it was too late, that her time had passed. But something had changed inside her tonight. Playing again had awakened something that she thought was gone forever, a small, steady fire that refused to die. She took the bus home, sitting by the window with her headphones on, though no music played. Her fingers tapped against her knee, following a rhythm only she could hear. Outside, the city lights blurred into colors, and for the first time in years, she felt peace. When she reached her small apartment, her younger brother Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. He looked up when she came in. "You're late," he said, smiling. "How was the event?" Lena hesitated, then smiled back. "It was different." He frowned, curious. "Different how?" She set her bag down and looked at her hands. "I played the piano tonight." Daniel's eyes widened. "You, seriously?" She nodded. "Someone asked me to." "I don't even know why I said yes," he grinned. "How did it go?" Lena thought for a moment. The sound of applause still echoed faintly in her mind. "It felt like home," she said softly. Daniel smiled and went back to his notebook. "You should play again. You're happiest when you do." Lena didn't answer, but her heart agreed. She sat on the couch, staring at her empty hands, feeling a quiet warmth inside her chest. The world outside was dark, but inside she felt light. Before going to bed, she opened the small wooden box she kept on her nightstand. Inside was a faded photograph of her parents and a folded piece of paper, an old music sheet with her mother's handwriting. She traced the notes with her finger and whispered, "I played again, Mom." Then she smiled. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the thin curtains of the small apartment, painting soft golden lines across the walls. The air smelled faintly of coffee and toast. Lena sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a warm mug, still lost in the memories of the night before. Everything had happened so quickly, yet it felt like a dream she didn't want to wake up from. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still hear the echo of the last note she played and the sound of applause that followed. Daniel shuffled in, rubbing his eyes and yawning. "You didn't sleep much, did you?" he asked, sitting across from her. Lena smiled faintly. "Not really. I kept thinking about last night." He grinned, leaning on his elbows. "You mean how you shocked an entire ballroom full of rich people?" Lena laughed softly. "Something like that." Daniel's tone grew serious. "You really should think about playing again. You've still got it, Lena. More than ever." She looked down at her hands. The same hands that had once carried plates and trays for hours now felt light again, almost like they were meant for something else. But the thought of returning to that world scared her. "It's not that simple," she said. "I have bills, rent, and, well, life." "Yeah, but you also have talent," Daniel replied. "People dream their whole lives for a moment like that. Maybe it means something." Lena didn't answer right away. She wanted to believe him, but part of her still feared what it would mean to hope again. She had closed that chapter so long ago, convincing herself it was better to be realistic. But deep inside she felt something stirring, a quiet desire she hadn't felt in years. That afternoon, when Daniel left for his classes, Lena sat alone by the window. The streets outside were busy with people rushing to work, buses honking and vendors shouting. Life moved fast, but she felt caught between yesterday and today. She opened her phone and scrolled through photos from the event, hoping to find a picture of the ballroom. Instead, she found something unexpected, a message notification. It was from the hotel manager. He thanked her for helping make the event such a success, then added that a few guests had asked about her. One of them wanted to contact her regarding her music. Lena blinked at the screen, her heart beating faster. Could it be Ethan? She hesitated for a moment, then typed a polite reply thanking him. She put the phone down, but her curiosity grew. Later in the evening, as she was folding her uniform, the phone buzzed again. This time it was indeed from Ethan. "Hi, Lena, I hope I'm not bothering you." The message began. "I wanted to say again that your performance last night was extraordinary." "I meant what I said. You should be playing, not serving. If you're free sometime, I'd love to talk." Lena read the message several times before replying. Her fingers hovered over the screen, unsure what to say. She didn't want to seem too eager, but she also didn't want to ignore the chance. Finally, she typed, "Thank you. I appreciate your kind words. I'm free tomorrow after work." The next day, she met Ethan at a small coffee shop near the park. The air outside was cool, and the faint sound of street musicians floated through the distance. Ethan was already there when she arrived, sitting by the window, looking much more relaxed than he had the night of the event. When he saw her, he stood and smiled warmly. "Lena," he greeted. "I'm glad you came." "Me too," she said softly, taking a seat. They ordered coffee, and for a while the conversation was light, about the weather, about the hotel, about music in general. But eventually Ethan leaned forward and said, "I wasn't exaggerating that night. You have something rare. You don't play for applause. You play for meaning. That's what moves people." Lena looked down at her cup, stirring it absent-mindedly. "I used to play all the time," she said quietly, "before life got in the way. It's hard to chase dreams when reality keeps reminding you of what you owe." Ethan nodded in understanding. "Believe me, I know what that feels like. But sometimes life gives you one small chance to return to what you love. You just have to take it." He reached into his bag and pulled out a small envelope. "There's a music studio downtown where I teach sometimes. They're holding open sessions for local artists next week. No pressure, no competition. Just people sharing music. I'd like you to come." Lena blinked, surprised. "You want me to play there?" He smiled. "Only if you want to. Think of it as a step forward. Not for anyone else, just for you." She hesitated. The thought of playing in front of strangers again made her nervous. But there was also excitement building inside her. Maybe this was the universe's way of nudging her back toward the path she had lost. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "Good," Ethan replied. "That's all I ask." Over the next few days, Lena couldn't stop thinking about the offer. While serving guests at the hotel restaurant, her mind wandered to the piano, to melodies she used to play. Even during her breaks, she found herself tapping rhythms on the counter with her fingers. Music had never really left her. It had just been waiting for her to listen again. When the day of the open session came, she almost didn't go. She stood in front of her mirror, dressed simply but neatly, her heart racing. She could easily text Ethan and say she couldn't make it. But then she remembered how it felt when she played at the Ballroom. The peace, the joy, the connection. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "You can do this." The studio was small but warm, with wooden floors and walls covered in old posters of musicians. A handful of people sat in folding chairs, chatting softly. Ethan waved from the corner, smiling when he saw her. "You came," he said, genuinely pleased. "I almost didn't," she admitted, "but here I am." He chuckled. "That's what matters." One by one, musicians took turns performing. A young man with a guitar, a woman singing softly, a small jazz trio. Each performance was unique, filled with its own flavor of emotion. When it was Lena's turn, Ethan introduced her. "This is Lena," he said. "Some of you might recognize her from the event last week. She has a story to tell through music." Lena walked to the piano, feeling the familiar nervous flutter in her chest. But this time it wasn't fear, it was energy, alive and bright. She sat down, closed her eyes, and began to play. The melody that flowed out wasn't rehearsed. It came naturally, like water finding its path. It started softly, like a whisper, and grew stronger, telling a story of hope rising from loss. The room grew still again, just like the ballroom had. Even the people in the back leaned forward, listening closely. When she finished, there was a moment of silence, then warm applause filled the space. Ethan smiled proudly. "See?" he said quietly when she returned to her seat. "You belong here." Lena didn't answer right away. She just sat, feeling tears prick at the corners of her eyes. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she belonged somewhere again, not just in the world but in her own skin. After the session, several people came to speak with her. One woman invited her to join a small local music group that met every weekend. Another offered to help her record a few pieces if she ever wanted to. Each word of encouragement felt like a gentle push forward, telling her that maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something new. That night, when she got home, Daniel was waiting for her. "So how did it go?" he asked eagerly. Lena smiled, setting her bag down. "Better than I expected. I played again and people actually listened." Daniel grinned. "Of course they did. You were amazing at the hotel, and I bet you were even better today." She laughed softly, sitting beside him. It felt different this time. Like I wasn't just remembering who I was becoming her again. Daniel nodded, his eyes full of pride. That's because you never stopped being her. You just forgot for a while. Lena leaned back, staring at the ceiling, a small smile curving her lips. The world suddenly felt a little bigger, a little brighter. She didn't know where this path would lead, but for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid to find out. As the evening continued, laughter and chatter filled the ballroom. The guests were enjoying the night, sipping their wine and sharing stories. The lights above sparkled like stars, and soft music played in the background. The air was filled with elegance and pride, but there was also something heavy that no one noticed, a sense of competition and judgment that often lived in such grand places. Lena kept working quietly, her tray balanced carefully in her hands. She smiled politely whenever someone looked her way, but deep inside her mind, her thoughts were far away. The moment Ethan had challenged her to play the piano still echoed inside her head. She tried to convince herself that it was just a silly dare, that no one expected her to actually do it. But another voice whispered that maybe this was the moment she had been running from for years, the moment to face what she had lost. When she looked at the piano across the hall, it almost felt alive. The polished wood reflected the lights above, and the black and white keys waited silently. She could almost hear the sound of it calling to her. She remembered how, as a child, she used to play every evening until the sun went down. Music had been her friend, her comfort, and her dream. But when life turned cruel, she had locked that dream away, thinking it would hurt less if she stopped trying. Now, with the challenge hanging in the air, she couldn't escape it anymore. Ethan, meanwhile, enjoyed the attention around him. People praised his skill and confidence. He smiled, showing charm and control. Yet a part of him kept glancing at Lena. Something about her calmness after his challenge made him curious. He had expected her to blush, stutter, or laugh it off, but she had looked him straight in the eyes and said she would play. That had unsettled him in a strange way. As the host of the evening took the stage and gave a short speech about the charity, Lena took a deep breath. She tried to focus on her work, collecting empty glasses and smiling when thanked. But every time the piano came into view, her heartbeat quickened. Her fingers twitched slightly, as if remembering an old rhythm. When the applause ended, the host invited Ethan to the piano. The crowd clapped eagerly, expecting brilliance. Ethan stood, bowed slightly, and walked confidently toward the piano. He glanced once more at Lena, his expression playful but proud. "After me," he said quietly, as if teasing her. Lena forced a small smile, pretending not to care. But inside, her nerves were tightening like strings. Ethan began to play. His fingers moved smoothly, every note perfect, every transition clean. The music was grand and powerful, the kind that made people nod with appreciation. But for all its precision, something felt missing, emotion. It was beautiful but empty. It was a display of talent, not feeling. When he finished, the crowd cheered loudly. Ethan stood, proud and sure of himself. He turned toward Lena again and smiled. "Your turn," he said, his tone light but his eyes testing her. The room quieted slightly. Everyone turned to look at the waitress who had dared to speak against the famous pianist. A few whispered among themselves. Some smiled, expecting her to shy away. Others leaned forward, curious to see what she would do. Lena's hands were trembling now. The tray in her hands suddenly felt heavy. Her throat tightened. For a moment she wanted to walk away, pretend she had never agreed. But something inside her refused. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was her heart remembering who she used to be. She slowly placed the tray on the nearest table. The guests watched silently as she walked toward the piano. Her simple black and white uniform looked out of place in the shining ballroom. But there was something graceful in the way she moved. Each step seemed to quiet the room a little more. When she reached the piano, she hesitated. Her reflection looked back at her from the glossy surface. Her mind screamed to turn back, but her heart whispered to stay. She sat down. Her fingers hovered over the keys. Uncertain, she closed her eyes for a second and took a deep breath. In that moment, memories flooded back. Her small home, her father's proud smile, her mother's laughter as she played. The echoes of her childhood came rushing through her chest, and suddenly the fear began to melt away. The guests waited. Some looked bored, others skeptical. Ethan leaned against a table, crossing his arms, watching closely. Then Lena pressed a single key. The sound was soft but pure, like a whisper. The room seemed to hold its breath. She pressed another and another, slowly forming a melody that didn't belong to any song they knew. It was something of her own, something that came from a place too deep for words. Each note carried a piece of her past, the joy, the pain, the hope. Her hands began to move faster, not from training but from feeling. She didn't think. She just played. Her body swayed slightly and her face softened, as if she was speaking through the piano. The audience was still. Even the waiters stopped moving. The lights seemed to dim slightly, or maybe it was just how the moment felt. Like the world had paused to listen. Ethan's confident smile slowly disappeared. His eyes widened a little as he watched her fingers glide across the keys. There was something in her playing he hadn't felt in a long time. Honesty. No performance, no show, just truth. The melody grew deeper, carrying emotions that words couldn't explain. It was as if every moment of loss and strength in her life had turned into sound. It wasn't perfect by technical standards, but it was powerful. Every mistake, every pause made it even more real. When she finally stopped, her fingers lingered on the keys. The last note hung in the air, fading slowly into silence. Lena kept her eyes closed, her heart racing, her chest rising and falling with deep breaths. No one clapped. Not yet. The silence was heavy but peaceful, as if no one wanted to break it. Then slowly, a single clap echoed from the back. Another followed, and soon the entire room erupted into applause. People stood, their faces soft with admiration. Some were smiling, some were crying quietly. Even Ethan stood still for a moment, then joined the applause, his expression no longer proud but humbled. Lena opened her eyes. She looked around, confused at first, then smiled faintly. She didn't feel proud or victorious. She just felt free, as if the weight she had carried for years had finally lifted. The applause grew louder, filling the ballroom like a wave. She stood slowly, bowed slightly, and stepped away from the piano. The other waiters looked at her with astonishment. The guests whispered her name as if she had become someone new. Ethan walked toward her, still clapping. When he reached her, he smiled, not the proud, confident smile from before, but something softer. "You were right," he said quietly. "Music isn't about being the best. It's about feeling." Lena didn't know what to say. She just nodded, her eyes shining. "It's what saved me," she replied softly. The guests continued to cheer, asking her name, praising her talent. But Lena didn't crave their attention. She looked once more at the piano, smiled faintly, and walked back to her place. The night continued, but something had changed. The music she played had touched every heart in that room, including her own, and for the first time in years she felt alive again. The room was still buzzing long after Lena stepped away from the piano. The applause had finally faded, but the memory of that sound seemed to hang in the air, heavy and electric. Conversations started again, but this time they were softer, thoughtful. People spoke in low voices about the young waitress who had played like her soul had been waiting for that one chance to be heard. Lena walked slowly back toward the service area, her mind still lost in the music. It didn't feel real to her, the clapping, the smiles, the kind words. She could still feel the piano keys under her fingers, warm and alive. Her chest was still tight, not from fear anymore, but from relief. She had done something she thought she'd never have the courage to do again. As she passed a mirror, she caught sight of her reflection. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes shining in a way she hadn't seen in years. She almost didn't recognize herself. For so long, she had been just another face in the crowd, someone trying to survive day by day. But tonight, something inside her had awakened again. Behind her, the guests were still talking. Some were trying to find her name. Others were calling the hotel manager, saying she deserved to be recognized. A few musicians in the crowd looked thoughtful, as if questioning what true music really meant after hearing her play. Ethan stood near the piano, still in quiet disbelief. He had performed in hundreds of places, concert halls, festivals, grand stages, but what he had just witnessed was something else. There had been no show, no competition, no polished routine. Just a woman sitting at a piano and playing from her heart. It humbled him more than he wanted to admit. When he finally saw her walking away, he excused himself from the group of people surrounding him and followed her. He didn't know what he was going to say. All he knew was that he needed to speak to her before the night ended. Lena was stacking empty glasses when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw Ethan standing there, his usual confident expression gone. He looked different, almost unsure. "That was incredible," he said quietly. "I mean it." You didn't just play, you spoke through the piano. Lena smiled politely. Thank you, I just played what I felt. He nodded, searching for words. How long have you been playing? You're not just talented, you're gifted. That kind of emotion can't be taught. She looked down at her hands, still slightly trembling. I used to play every day, but life changed. I stopped a long time ago. There was a silence between them, the kind that held respect instead of awkwardness. Ethan wanted to ask more, but he could see the hint of pain in her eyes, so he didn't push. You should never stop, he finally said. The world needs music like that. Real music, Lena smiled faintly. Maybe. But sometimes the world doesn't give you time to dream. Her words stayed with him long after she turned away to continue her work. Hours passed, and the night began to wind down. Guests started leaving, still talking about the mysterious waitress who had stolen the spotlight. Some even approached Lena to thank her personally. She accepted their kind words shyly, unsure how to react to so much attention. When the ballroom finally emptied, the staff began cleaning up. The music had stopped, the lights were dimmed, and the magic of the night slowly faded. Yet for Lena, the feeling in her heart remained strong. She couldn't stop thinking about that moment when her fingers touched the keys. It had felt like she was talking to her past self, forgiving the part of her that had given up. She sat alone for a while after her shift ended, looking at the empty ballroom. The piano still stood in the corner, silent now. She walked over to it again, her shoes softly clicking against the floor. Sitting down, she touched the keys gently. Not to play this time, but to say goodbye. Her thoughts drifted back to her younger days. Her small home, the sound of rain outside the window, her mother's voice telling her to never stop dreaming. She had forgotten that promise for a long time. But tonight reminded her that it was still there, waiting for her to remember. She smiled softly. Thank you, she whispered to the piano as if it were an old friend who had helped her speak again. Just then, Ethan returned, holding 2 cups of coffee. I thought you might still be here, he said, offering her one. She accepted it with a small laugh. You don't give up easily, do you? He shrugged. Not when I see something special. They sat quietly for a moment, sipping their coffee, surrounded by the faint echo of the evening's music. It wasn't an awkward silence. It felt peaceful, like 2 people who didn't need to fill the space with words. Ethan finally said, I've met a lot of musicians. Some are brilliant, some are famous, but what you have, it's different. You made people feel something real tonight. That's rare. Lena looked at him thoughtfully. Maybe it's because I wasn't trying to prove anything. I just played what I felt. He nodded slowly. That's exactly what made it powerful. For a while, they just sat there, both lost in their thoughts. Then Ethan said, You know, I'm organizing a small concert next month. It's for underprivileged kids who want to learn music. I think they'd be inspired to hear your story and your music. Lena blinked in surprise. You want me to play? Yes, he said simply. Not as a waitress, but as a musician. Her first instinct was to say no. She wasn't ready for that, she told herself. She had a job to do, bills to pay, a life that didn't allow dreams. But deep down she knew something had changed. That spark she had buried so long ago had started to glow again. I'll think about it, she said softly. That's all I ask. He smiled, stood up and left her alone with her thoughts. Lena stayed there for a while longer, looking at the piano and thinking about what he said. She didn't know if she had the courage to face a crowd again, but she couldn't deny how alive she had felt when she played. It was like breathing after holding her breath for years. As the lights were turned off one by one, she gathered her things and walked out into the quiet night. The city outside was peaceful, the air cool. She looked up at the stars and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe life had taken a lot from her, but it hadn't taken everything. Her music was still there, waiting for her to return to it. And maybe this time she wouldn't let it go. She walked home with a small smile on her face, her steps light. The sound of her own melody echoed softly in her mind, reminding her that sometimes one moment of courage could change everything. In the ballroom behind her, the piano sat in silence, but it wasn't just an instrument anymore. It was a witness to something beautiful, a woman finding herself again through the music she thought she had lost. And somewhere deep inside, Lena knew this wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning of a new one. The morning after the event, sunlight poured through the small window of Lena's apartment. The city was already awake outside, but for a while she stayed under her blanket, staring at the ceiling, replaying the night before. Everything felt like a dream. The lights, the crowd, the sound of her music filling the room. For years she had hidden that part of herself, but now it was out in the open, alive again. Her phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from one of her coworkers, saying everyone was still talking about her performance. Even the hotel manager wanted to speak with her. She smiled at the screen, a little shy, a little proud, then set the phone aside. She made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the early sunlight touch the rooftops. Something felt different in her chest. Lighter, freer. When she arrived at work that evening, people greeted her with smiles and kind words. Some clapped jokingly as she walked by. Lena blushed and tried to hide her face, laughing it off. The kitchen staff teased her gently, calling her the star of the ballroom. It was all in good humor, but deep down she felt a quiet happiness she hadn't felt in years. The hotel manager called her into his office. He was a man who rarely smiled, but today his face looked almost warm. "You gave people something they'll remember," he said, folding his hands on the desk. "I didn't know you could play like that." "I didn't think I could anymore," Lena admitted softly. He nodded. "You brought more attention to this place than any event we've had in months. Guests have been asking about you. Some even suggested we let you perform again." She blinked, surprised. "Perform?" "Yes," he said. "We host private dinners, weddings, fundraisers. They all want live piano again. You could do it part-time if you'd like." Lena hesitated. The thought of playing again in front of people made her both nervous and excited. "I'll think about it," she said honestly. He smiled faintly. "Take your time, but don't hide that talent again." When she left the office, she felt her heart fluttering. For so long, she had seen the piano as a reminder of what she'd lost. Now it was becoming something else. An opening, a new beginning. Later that night, while she was polishing glasses at the counter, Ethan walked in. She hadn't expected to see him again so soon. He was wearing a simple jacket, not the elegant suit from the night before. He looked more human now, less like a celebrity and more like a friend. "Hey," he said, giving her a small smile. "I heard the manager offered you a new role." Lena raised an eyebrow. "You already found out?" He laughed. "Let's just say people have been talking." "You made quite an impression," she smiled, shaking her head. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted to prove something to myself." "And you did," he said. "But I think you also reminded everyone else what music is supposed to feel like." They talked for a while, just like old friends catching up. Ethan told her about his life on the road, the concerts, the exhaustion of always performing for applause instead of meaning. Lena listened quietly, understanding more than he expected. "You know," she said after a pause. "Maybe that's why I stopped. I was afraid I'd start playing for others and forget why I started." Ethan nodded. "That's easy to do. But what you played last night, it wasn't for them. It was for you. And that's why it worked." The way he said it made her chest warm. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen not as a worker, but as a person. Before he left, he reminded her about the small concert for the children. "Think about it," he said. "They could really use someone like you." That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the piano, about the feeling of her hands moving freely, about the children who might be waiting to hear something real. The thought scared her, but it also excited her. A week later, she called Ethan and said yes. The concert was held in a small community center, not nearly as grand as the hotel ballroom. The stage was plain, the lights soft. Rows of folding chairs were filled with children and their parents, people who couldn't afford fancy music schools but came because they loved the sound of a song. There was no glitter, no fancy gowns, just warmth. As Lena stood behind the curtain, she felt her hands shaking again, just like that night in the ballroom. Ethan stood beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You've got this," he said. "Just play what you feel. That's all." She nodded, took a deep breath, and walked out. When she sat down at the piano, the children were watching her with wide, curious eyes. Some of them held small notebooks, ready to write things down. She smiled at them, recognizing the same kind of dreams she had once carried. "This is for anyone who's ever felt like giving up," she said softly. "Don't. The music inside you never really leaves." Then she began to play. The melody that filled the room was simple but full of heart. It wasn't about perfection, it was about connection. Each note felt like a thread weaving through the hearts of everyone listening. The children were silent, completely drawn in. Even their parents leaned forward, eyes glistening. Halfway through, she noticed a little girl sitting in the front row, her eyes shining with wonder. The girl's small hands were moving gently on her lap, copying the way Lena's fingers danced over the keys. Lena smiled mid-song, realizing that this was what music was truly for. Not applause, not fame, but inspiration. When the song ended, there was a long pause before the room filled with cheers and claps. The children stood up, clapping as loudly as they could. Some of them ran to her afterward, asking how she learned to play, if she could teach them someday. Lena knelt down to talk to them, her heart swelling with joy. Ethan watched from the side of the stage, a proud smile on his face. He didn't say anything, but he didn't need to. Lena's smile said it all. Later, as they packed up, Lena looked around the small hall. "It's strange," she said quietly. "I played in a ballroom full of people, but this feels so much bigger." Ethan nodded. "Because it is. This is what real music does. It reaches people where it matters." They walked out together into the cool evening air. The streetlights flickered on and the sound of laughter echoed from the hall behind them. Lena breathed deeply, feeling at peace. "I used to think my life was over when I stopped playing," she said, "but maybe that was just a pause. Maybe I was meant to find it again this way." Ethan smiled. "Sometimes we lose things so we can find them again with new meaning." They parted ways at the corner, promising to stay in touch. As Lena walked home, she felt no fear about the future anymore. She didn't know where her music would take her next, but for the first time she wanted to find out. When she reached her small apartment, she sat by the window again, the city lights glowing below. She closed her eyes and imagined the piano keys under her fingers. Without realizing it, she began to hum softly, the same tune she had played for the children. And somewhere in that quiet room, surrounded by ordinary things, something extraordinary was reborn. A woman who had once been afraid to dream, now learning to dream again. Her life wasn't perfect. She still had long shifts, bills to pay, and quiet nights where loneliness whispered in the corners. But now she had something powerful that no struggle could take away. Her music, her heart, and the courage to keep going. The sound of the city faded into the background as her humming turned into a gentle song. She smiled, knowing that the next time she sat at a piano, she wouldn't be playing to prove herself. She would be playing to live, and that more than anything made her truly free.